I said, my name's Jeff Miller. We operate out of Plainview, Texas, cover pretty much the all of West Texas in one form or another, focusing on irrigation management, nutrient management, soil health, and then we also do some seed as well. So kind of I guess the topic today is just going to be fundamentals of crop water use and irrigation scheduling, but we're going to dig into several different things, probably from a more practical approach with how we're working with some of our operators, and really focusing on we know we're going to have stressful conditions. How do we set plants up to be able to handle that and stretch this water as far as we can? There we go. So as we get started, just thinking about irrigation, we're here at a Master Irrigator course, and but I wanted you to think about that irrigation is not necessarily just about water. It's about managing risk, timing, and stress, and we'll dig into that here in just a second. But we're fortunate, blessed, whatever you want to say, to operate in a fairly harsh environment. We've got variable rainfall from too much to too little. Sometimes that all happens in the same month. We've operated in very high transpiration rates. We've got wind, we've got plenty of sunshine. Where there's some challenges in that. As you can see here, right in the heart of the country, the only place that's worse than this is Death Valley. So if that gives you any hope, but the good thing is that we generally cool off at night because of our elevation, so that allows us to to do the things that we can. And then we've got to grow a crop out here, and that crop's going to have different requirements as we move through the growing season, and how do we put plans together to be able to handle that. So weather's very important with how we start the process of getting a crop into the ground and managing it through the growing season. We employ several different weather prediction services that are beyond just your local stuff here, and it's nice whenever they all align, because you feel like, hey, this is probably going to happen. Whenever they don't align, then we kind of gotta shoot from the hip a little bit. But I don't dig into the details very deep as far as the individual months or days. But if we can start picking up trends, is there going to be a stressful event that we need to prepare for the season? How severe is it going to be? How long is it going to be? And when is that going to happen? And if we can understand that, we can build a plan from the start to be able to either offset whenever it's not going to be favorable, or take advantage and optimize whatever crop that we're growing out there, and take advantage of some better conditions. I will say, I pulled this about a month ago. There's been some slight changes, but just looking at this growing season, they are giving us some pretty good chances for above average rainfall through the growing season with not excessive temperatures. So that's encouraging. Probably going to be a little cool here in April to get started, so may it affect some of your planning intentions as far as getting started early. But I noticed a while ago that we've got some rain chances coming in here 1st of March, so we'll see what happens. But utilizing some of this information to help build that plan. Once again, rainfall is unpredictable, unreliable, and even on top of that, when it does come, how effective is it coming? And so, pretty busy slide, but looking at some long-term weather data out of Hill County where we operate, it may say that we get 19 inches of rain. That's a pretty good season. Whenever we're talking about averages, most of that's going to happen right here in the growing season. So what we're encountering now is not all that out of the ordinary. We don't typically get a lot of moisture here after the first of the year. But once we get into April and May, those chances start picking back up. The other part of this is just looking at how effective are those rainfall events. And so, the majority of these are going to be less than 1/2 of an inch. And so do you have a system that has the ability to capture that and store it, or is it going to run off and evaporate? We're always waiting for these big, 1-2 inch rains. They don't happen near as often as we would like, and whenever they do, Typically they come hard and fast, and nothing but bad things happen there as well. And so understanding how do we set our systems up to be able to capture this rainfall whenever we need it, to bridge the gap whenever we can't provide it with irrigation. So, why are we here? Why do we irrigate? Well, primarily it is to stabilize yields whenever that rainfall isn't falling like it's supposed to. It's to offset that crop water use when it matters most. Definitely trying to reduce the stress during those critical time periods, and protecting yield potential. I don't care how much water we apply. I don't want to apply any more than we have to, but we want to be able to protect that yield potential that we've got out there. And there's a couple of examples here. We'll dig into that as we go through the presentation. So water, what does it do? Why is it important? Well, number one, it's going to cool the plant through that transpiration process. It's pulling water out of the soil up through the plant, out the leaves, out the stomates, and that is going to keep provide that cooling effect. As that happens, we're pushing nutrients to those parts of the plant that need it, and we're also keeping that photosynthetic process working as efficiently as possible. And that plant's real job is just to capture sunlight and to create sugar to feed your biology, and also to turn around and push that sugar into that harvestable part of the plant, whether it be grain or cotton or whatever it may be. So it doesn't have a whole lot of processes, but these are very, very important with the whole plant process. So we talk about evapotranspiration, ET. We throw those terms around a lot. And really just thinking about your systems as you set things up, where are some opportunities that we can affect some of this water use throughout the growing season. So we'll start down here at the bottom. Whenever we got full canopy, we've got high transpiration rates, and there's really not much that you can do about that except get down on your knees and pray that we got a cool spell and some rain to come and help. But our real opportunity is here early in the season to take the evaporation out of that ET equation as best as we can, because we've got bare soil until we get crop, canopy closure. Depending on how much residue that you got on that surface is going to affect that rate, and the better job that we do at reducing that amount of evaporation gives us a longer window before we have to crank up those pivots, and also just helps just protect the entire system from buffering soil temperatures, creating air pockets, and really helping that soil biology to do its job, and allow that plant to go off and grow and build root systems that are going to help you out later on in the growing season, so we don't get into this scenario here where we run short at the most critical time of the growing season. So, we want to build healthy soils, and anything that we can do to improve that infiltration, we can do to reduce that evaporation. That's going to expand that water capacity that we've got available to that crop. And nothing earth-shattering here. Everybody's kind of in a different place, but there's definitely things that we're doing, maybe some things that we need to try and do differently to make sure that we've got these soils operating at their optimum rates. We've got good balance between nutrients, biology, and the physical aspects of that, so that we can bridge the gap between those irrigations. So we deal with two different kinds of stress, and one of them is the biotic piece. That's going to be your insects, your diseases, your weeds. Things that we can take care of as we see fit. Some of these we can predict when they're going to happen. There's traits, there's chemicals, there's stuff like that. But really what we're focusing on is the abiotic piece. That is, that's going to be your heat, your drought, your flooding, your hail, wind, all these kind of things. And something that a lot of people don't realize is that, applications of fertilizer or herbicides can put stress on that crop, because that crop has got to metabolize that herbicide. If we get our fertility out of balance, we're throwing some antagonisms there, and causing some bad things to happen for the plant. And so all of these things can stack up on us. In a lot of cases, we don't necessarily see them coming, so we're going to have to be reactive But if we can set that plant up for success to be able to handle that through, that soil health piece, building proper balanced nutrition, as well as being smart with how we apply our water, we can bridge the gap in between those stressful periods that we're most likely going to have. So we've got to as we think about irrigation management, we've got to understand the soil and water holding capacity, one of the biggest pieces that we work with. And so, depending on what kind of soil type you've got, whether you've got a sand or all the way over here on a clay loam, that's going to determine the size of your gas tank. And so I kind of look at working in the sands as kind of working with a lawnmower gas tank, and over here in these clay loams is working with my pickup with a 40-gallon gas tank. And so it is what it is. You've just got to be able to manage those a little bit differently, understanding that we've got different levels of field capacity, we've got different levels of permanent wilting point. Our road ditches are a little bit different with each one of these, and this is part of what we do as water managers, is pay attention to what those soil types are to help us plan out what our irrigation schedule is going to be, what that rate is going to be, and timing. A couple of important terms that'll be important over the next couple of slides is saturation. This is where all those pores, all that pore space is filled up with water, and you're actually seeing some drainage out because we don't have any more room to hold it. Whenever we get to field capacity is once that drainage has stopped, we've got a good mixture of oxygen and water in those pore spaces, and really this is the most that we need to have in that soil. On the bottom end of that is permanent wilting point. This is the point where that soil is dried out to the point that it's not going to be able to pull any more moisture out of that. That plant's going to show visible signs of stress and won't be able to keep up, and it's called permanent for a reason because it doesn't come back. And then we just visited about available holding capacity. That's that gas tank that you're working with, and then we'll talk about maximum allowable depletion here in the next slides. So just kind of a visual representation of this. Over here we've got all the pore spaces full. We're seeing that drainage down below. As you can see here in the middle where we're at field capacity, we've got water, but we've also got oxygen in there, which is very important for not only your roots, but also any of those microbes that you've got out there that are going to help that plant do the things that it's designed to do. And then if you'll notice over here on permanent wilting point, we've still got some water in the system. It's not completely oven dry, but it's held so tightly to those particles that it's not going to be released to the plant. So just thinking about if you've got a sponge and you dip it into a bucket of water and you pull it out, that sponge is going to trickle out some water for a little bit, and that's what we would call saturation. Once that stops, you've got all those pore spaces full. That's going to be at that field capacity point. So as we look at these soil moisture graphs, we see that saturation point, and then we see that drop off. And once it starts dropping back off, that's where we get into that field capacity. And then if I was to squeeze that, that sponge and get all the water out of it, that's where we're at permanent wilting point. So you're still going to feel some moisture there, but it's not able to release. And so just another idea of just looking here, understanding these different soil types and textures are going to affect these numbers here, and that's the road ditches that we've got to work in. Just looking here on a sandier type soil, said we can exceed that saturation level pretty quick, but we don't have a very big gas tank to work with. As we get over here in like these Pullman clay loams that I work in, these Sherman silty clays, we've got a lot bigger gas tank to work with. Whenever we look at these moisture sensors, we're able to tell where is that field capacity point, and be able to calculate back where is that permanent wilting point that we need to work within. Just kind of giving you a graph or a math equation to work with. Looking at those two ends of the spectrum between a sandy and a clay loam soil. We've got 17% of that volumetric water content in 1 foot of soil, giving us 2 inches to work with that would be available. Whereas in that sand, We've got a much lower amount in that gas tank, giving us only 1 inch of moisture to work with. Looking through and kind of understanding how this plant progresses along through the growing season. We start out, we've got small plants, we've got shallow root systems. Really we're just kind of managing that top foot and knowing what's soil type that we're working with. We know that we've got 2 inches available there for that plant to work with. As we start growing and building biomass both above ground and below ground, we tap into that second foot. That gas tank just got bigger. It's like I got an old '85 Chevy pickup that has dual gas tanks, so I'm ready to rock and roll. As we get into that reproductive stage, we've got hopefully we've been able to manage this system where we can drive that rooting all the way through, down to 3 or 4 foot, whatever we're dealing with. Understanding that at each different level there may be a different amount of water available. Fortunately for us, we're fairly homogeneous through the top 3 feet in this area to stick around that 2 inches per foot. But giving you that, really we're managing the top 2 feet at this point, and we're just keeping this in reserve. That extra gas can in the back of the pickup just in case you run out. So then we think about, how are we going to manage it now that we know that we've got that amount of water available to the plant, and we call this maximum allowable depletion. And so back to that gas tank analogy is just, I always think that once I get down past the half a tank of gas in my vehicle, that bottom half of the tank sure seems to go fast. And so, anything that I can do to keep in the top half just makes me feel better more than anything. And, driving a long trip, you don't want to sit there and run it all the way down, because you may get into a part of the country that it's going to be a long ways to a gas station. And so it's kind of the same way with how we manage water on, within a cropping system, is that the better chances, we have better chance of success if we can stay in the upper half of that depletion. So we've got 2 inches available, but we're really managing that inch to an inch and a half. And a lot of this depends on what crop we're growing and what stage of the crop that we are, because this is not a static number that we work with. But just kind of giving you another idea. Most of the crops that we work with, we're going to probably have that maximum depletion at around 50%. So anything that we can do to keep our moisture levels up in the top half of that is going to lead to success. It's not terrible if we dip below that line. It just means that we're going to need to get back around with that pivot here pretty quick, because we don't want to use up our reserves. So this is just kind of giving you an idea of what that looks like throughout the growing season. Early on in that first month of that life, like I said, we're managing that top foot. We can get that pivot around relatively quick. We're not using a whole lot of water just because of the crop size. Hopefully we've got a profile built up that we'll be able to utilize later. So we have the opportunity to really draw this down, below that 50% in that top foot. As that plant continues to grow out here in that second month, we start adding more leaves. Well, we're getting into that critical time frame, and that's when we bump that back up into that roughly 50%. Try to keep everything up here in the optimum level. And a lot of this is because gravitational pull just makes it harder for that for roots down in this level to pull that moisture. It takes more energy, and so anything that we can do to have that plant utilize its energy to not waste it on sitting here trying to pull water that's too hard to get. This is the ideal situation anyway. So what this is here is we've got 2 different scenarios of managing water. The black line here is just a typical schedule, 8,500s every 3 days, and going through the growing season. And then this bottom one was using that 50% maximum allowable depletion as we got into the main part of the growing season. And really, there was an opportunity here to save a little bit of water here on the front side, because we were able to draw that down a little bit better over the scheduling piece. And what I notice here is that we've got a lot of irrigations here that are bumping that, that saturation point. And anytime that we saturate that soil, cut that oxygen out, that plant's shutting down for anywhere from 24 to 72 hours as that water drains out, and that's wasted energy that we could have been putting into grain or lint. And so, we were able to manage this a whole lot better, keep this still above that MAD line all the way through the growing season. And I don't know what the actual numbers were on the yield, but I do know that there was I want to say like a 30 bushel increase by operating down here versus here where it was staying wet the whole time. So, different approaches, but definitely, some improvement that can be made, not only from a yield standpoint, but even some water savings there early in the season. So, we understand some of these basic principles, understanding, that movement, that behavior of water in the soil, really, considerations for over irrigation. And, most of my guys that I deal with, like, there's no way that I can over irrigate a crop out here. Well, I would say, yeah, from a season-long perspective, that may be difficult, but there are times during that growing season that you're probably putting on more than you need to. And, Jordan talked about pre-water guidelines. Anything that we can do to have a relatively full profile to start with is much better than trying to build that profile while we have a crop growing. Number one, you're putting water on, but you're also pulling it out at a different rate with the plant there, even if it's small. Number two is that you're probably putting on a little bit more irrigation than you need, so we're impeding that root development that we're going to need later on in the growing season. And we could be setting ourselves up for some disease and other issues. The other part of that is that during that time frame, we're talking V5, V7 in corn. That's also the time that we put out herbicides, and if you put out too much water at that point in time, you're probably going to reduce the effectiveness of that herbicide for longevity, and we may be pushing some of our fertility that we've added below that active root zone, which slows development down as well. Well, we got to take into account what crop requirement is early in the season. We don't use near as much as we do whenever we're at tassel. And then anything that we can do to reduce the amount of evaporation and pay attention to the, we don't want to get into that saturated range where we're starting to drain stuff out of the bottom. Here's some just some stuff that we've been able to utilize with our moisture sensors. Number one is evaluating the effectiveness of that irrigation system. We're putting on an inch of water. Are we getting an inch of water into the ground? And how long is that taking? This is actually a comparison between two different systems. One's no-till, one's conventional. And these numbers up here represent minutes. So basically it's taken 2 hours under this no-till corn situation to get that 1 inch of water into the ground. And on the conventional till, it was taking 18 hours to get it in. And so, being able to, can we improve the infiltration rates out here? I definitely believe that we can through certain practices. There are some new other technologies and products that are on the market that we've been playing with that we've seen improvements as well. And if we have time, we'll talk about those here at the end. Understanding crop rooting depth. Anything that we can do to improve that, increase that rooting depth as early as possible in that plant's life is critical, because we're going to need those roots later on in the growing season. But the thing that you got to understand is, 70% of that extraction is going to happen in the top half of that rooting depth. So if you've got a corn plant out here that's 36 inches deep at its deepest, really, 18 inches is where most of that water is extracted. That's where most of your fertility is extracted. We want roots down here in the bottom, but those are for, that's your bank that you need to go, make withdrawals from only on occasion, not all the time. And so different crops have different, maximum rooting depths. So definitely something that, that we want to keep into account, and utilizing some of these moisture sensors. We pay a lot of attention where our roots are at. Roots can't grow to moisture, they grow through moisture. And so you've got to have it available for them to grow into, and so keep that process moving along. This is looking at a couple of side-by-side fields. Same thing, we manage the water over here through moisture sensors, maximum allowable depletion. This was just a typical 1 inch every application. And as you can notice, we drove those roots down all the way down to 36 inches by the middle of July over here. And over here, we never got them below about 18 inches really. And you know, the difference in that was significant from a yield standpoint. You know, even though we had roots all the way down to 36 inches, as things improved, we you know, we kept up with our irrigation. You know, those roots were active down here, but they weren't really doing much until later on in the growing season, because we were managing things in the top half of that. Versus over here, we were just fighting it all year, just trying to get you know, trying to keep up because we had such a smaller gas tank to work with. Soil, water, and temperature are very important with biology as well, and this is something that, you know, probably has become quite a buzzword over the last several years, but there's a lot of truth into this. And it's quite amazing to me that, you know, our microorganisms like to operate in that 50 to 75% moisture range, just like where we want to keep that from our maximum allowable depletion. You know, they start waking up at about 40-degree soil temps, start going to work, and by the time it's 80 degrees, they're really, you know, pumping out the you know, the enzymes that are needed to break loose some of these nutrients and hold on to water and all that kind of stuff. And so, very important. You know, we talked about that evaporation piece, keeping that ground regulated and not over irrigating or under irrigating, so that we can keep them you know, operating where they need to be to give us some free, not only fertility, but, you know, making that water available and everything else. Whenever I started this business, I was just going to work on water management, and I got drug into the nutrient management business real quick, because there is a very close relationship there. Whenever we've got a balanced nutrition piece going on, it directly relates to our water use efficiency, builds stronger roots, improved plant health, better nutrient use efficiency, and reducing that water loss by paying attention to these you know, these different nutrients and keeping them in balance. Whenever we get them out of balance, you know, we affect our rooting depth, which is going to affect our water absorption, which is going to affect our drought resistance later on in the year. We also have an increase or a decrease in cell wall strength, which, you know, things happening inside the plant, and then reducing those enzyme functions that are going to keep that plant moving along. And so everything that we can do to keep this, you know, keep this fertility in balance is very important to the system. So as we go through this, you know, some things to consider. You know, plant available calcium is a big thing that we, you know, pay attention to. You know, it's very important for that cell wall, you know, strength. It's also the highway for these nutrients and water. And you probably pulled a soil test, and it probably says that you have plenty out there, and you do. But the problem is most of it is tied up. And whenever we started running Haney tests, we've realized that, hey, there's some instances out here where we may need to be looking at some different calcium sources to keep that system moving along. And then we're paying a lot of attention to our plant available carbon. So not just your organic matter, but the available carbon portion of that. Anytime that we can increase that, you know, number one, we're breaking loose free nutrients that we don't have to go pay for somewhere. We're improving that water holding capacity. You know, just giving that biology a great spot to live, to be able to give us something back. You know, as we get into some of these nutritional deficiencies, whenever we don't have enough available carbon, you know, we're having to put on more nitrate, and whenever we do that, it's going to take, you know, it's going to burn carbon, like up to 12 units. It's going to take 3 units of water to be able to balance those things out. And so, you know, we want to be careful with not putting out too much nitrogen, especially early on in the growing season. You know, splitting those applications out, maybe even throwing in a carbon source with it to help things out. And so, you know, there's a lot of buzz on social media right now around this term. You know, what does it do? Well, it's going to make more fertility available. It's not going to allow that tie-up to happen as quickly. It's going to see better micronutrient uptake, which is very important, especially the enzyme functions within the plant as we get later on into the growing season. Whenever you have healthier plants, you're able to build that carbon, you're able to build a more resilient soil that's going to be able to handle these stress periods, and which is going to lead to water use efficiency. So just an example here, on the bottom is that available carbon level, and as we go from low to high, we see a direct response of needing to put fertilizer out there, and it's all because it has made these nutrients available. So what's gonna, these are the drivers of the system, and what's gonna slow them down? Well, overuse of fertilizers, especially nitrogen and phosphorus, and we see this especially early in the season, guys that front load a lot of it. I don't like to see more than about 40 pounds of nitrogen at any given time sitting in the system, so being able to split those things out. We operate outside of this pH range, unfortunately, but thinking about things that happen in that root zone, that rhizosphere, the pHs are a little bit different, and as you increase that carbon content, those pHs are going to get back to a more neutral state, which is going to allow some of these nutrients that are tied up to break loose. Your lack of crop rotation causes issues. You've got to have some higher carbon crops mixed in with carbon negative crops. And excessive tillage can definitely destroy that system that's going to take years to build it back. So how do we raise it? Well, once again, don't over apply these fertilizers. Have a healthy, effective, efficient growing crop that's going to be pushing those sugars into the ground. That's going to lead to that stress reduction, and then being able to break down that crop residue from that high carbon crop into that available carbon. So digging through crop water requirements, Jordan did a great job on this, so we won't spend a whole lot of time on some of these slides, but just thinking about as we start managing this crop. So every crop has a water use curve to it, where we start off down here early in the season. We're not using very much. We don't have a big plant. We don't have deep roots. Our biggest nemesis at this point in time is evaporation, but as that plant grows, as that root system starts digging deeper, we see that crop water use, climb. At some point, we're going to exceed the limit of the irrigation system that we can, feel that need. So that's why it's very important to have roots as deep as possible with moisture to be able to, bridge that gap so that we're not sitting here stressing at the end of the growing season. One of the big things that I run into almost every year is guys coming in here and they want to, they know that early on we're determining that ear size, and they want to make sure that they got plenty of water out there during that time frame. But as you can see, this plant doesn't need a whole lot. There's not a lot of leaves out there. There's not a lot of roots, and at times we can over apply water at this point, and I'm a big fan of putting out what it needs, not any more than that, because we don't want to stress that plant, slow it down for later use. We try to put our sensors out, directly after crop establishment, so that we can pay attention to what those roots are going to do, and then we're also observing things above ground through various methods, so that we can set that plant up for success as we get into this critical growth stage. As we're looking through here, as that plant continues to grow, as we drive those roots deeper into that profile, we're managing a different, a bank account, a different gas tank. And so, here early in the season, we're just really focused on that top foot. As we get, more leaves growing out there, we start tapping into that second foot. And then, finally, by the time that we're at maximum water use, we want to be using that whole profile. Is there an opportunity to cut anything back? Not really. I mean, we don't want a plant to have a bad day, but I will say that the least the least destructive part of the season is early in that growing season, just because we've got an opportunity. We can generally get those pivots around quick enough to take care of any kind of needs. So if there is an opportunity, it doesn't matter what crop it is, it's going to be early in the growing season. But really, as you can see, as we get towards those real critical time periods, we can have significant yield loss if we put too much stress on these plants. Grain sorghum, similar growth curve, making sure we got that plant set up as it goes into boot. Cotton, same thing, making sure it's set up as it starts to put on blooms. Different amounts of stress. Same thing basically is what I'm trying to get to here, is that early in the growing season we see the opportunity to probably cut back and not put on near as much, just because we've got such a shallow root system and a small plant. Many times on cotton, the mistake that's made is putting on a little too much water here in that pre-squaring time frame, maybe a little bit too much nitrogen, and we start seeing verticillium wilt show up. And the other thing is we may set ourselves up for a problem late in the season with how we shut that plant down. And so that is a great time to be very smart with the irrigation and not get too overzealous. So looking through some irrigation strategies, number one, you got to know what you have, and are you going to be able to keep up with that? Do we need to adjust the acres? Do we need to adjust planting dates? Do we need to adjust maturities? Do we need to adjust plant populations to match up with what we've got from a gallons availability? So that's very important, and being honest with yourself and not thinking about what it was 5-10 years ago. Russell French with Pioneer back several years ago did a study trying to predict yields based on that gallons per minute, and really looking at a couple of very interesting years from dry, average, and wet. He was able to get pretty close, especially on an average, to a wet year, based on these gallons per minute. And so, like I said, being realistic with the yield goals that you're trying to go after, being realistic with that gallons per minute, can help us set up a good plan to move forward. Can planting date affect water use? Absolutely, and Jordan did a really good job of covering that. But as we get later into the planting window, we can drop that expected irrigation requirement by a couple of inches, and a lot of that's just because of that crop is hitting its growth stages a little bit quicker, and we're also getting rain, just like we saw in those first couple of slides, to be able to offset some of that irrigation. So definitely a strategy that we employ, working with different planting dates. Here's just looking at when is that critical window going to be. This is for a mid-April planted. You're going to be hitting that critical window there in late June. As we move into a May time frame planting, you're in kind of that mid-July. And then if we move into a June planting date, you're at the latter part of August. And so, understanding when you've got water available, where you've got water available, are we splitting that between different crops, and making sure that that critical window is not overlapping. We like to have about at least a 30-day split between different critical windows on if we're sharing water, and 45 days is even better. And so that may affect your cropping mix and various things. Looking at hybrid maturity as it relates to water use, and as you would expect, as we go from fuller season things to shorter season things, we can shave some inches off of that requirement. And just because there's basically less leaves that we've got to go to, we're hitting those growth stages a little bit quicker. The only thing I'll caution you is, as we shorten that maturity, you got to be a pretty good manager, because those growth stages that are very critical are going to come quick and fast, and you want to make sure that you've got your system set up. Versus, it seems like with the longer maturities in both cotton and corn and milo, that we have a little wiggle room as we look at some longer stuff. Talking about that maximum allowable depletion, like I said, it's not a static number that we work with all season. That it's a very fluid number. Early on in the growing season, we can pull that moisture down quite a bit, 60 to 70%. But as we get into that heavy vegetative stage, that's where we're operating in that 50. And then as we get close to maturity, we can drop that back down. Cotton is in a little bit different scenario. And so just kind of giving you an idea that, as we manage water, we pay attention to these things very importantly, growing through, and that gives us the ability to be smart with that water that's applied and avoid pushing us over that saturation point. Pre-irrigation, this year I think it's going to be very important as we get started, because we've been pulling soil samples and it's plenty dry out there, and so being smart with going about how you go about this. And like I said, it's hard to build a profile whenever you've got a crop growing. And so, there's things that you can do this time of year. Hopefully you got some cover out there. Maybe you switch everything to bubble mode to drive it down deep. But doing some things to get that profile starting to fill back up. Depending on what soil type you've got, it's going to require a little bit different strategy. Where you've got sands versus tighter ground, and comparing that to your irrigation capacity. How much water do you need out there? These are just some guidelines that we kind of loosely follow as we move through a pre-irrigation. Adjusting pivot speed, once again, this goes back to a lot of that, what soil type do you have. If we've got a sandier soil out there, we're probably going to put on lighter irrigations more frequently, just because of that gas tank size and infiltration rates, versus whenever we've got more clay loam type soil. Typically we'll end up slowing those down and putting them on less frequently, just because we've got better water holding capacity, so we can extend that period in between. And of course, down on the South Plains, we pretty well operate everything from a LIPA standpoint, just to get that water into the soil where it belongs, and try to reduce that amount of soil that's going to evaporate. And everybody plants in circles and all that fun stuff down there anyway. As we get into crop establishment and start moving into this growing season, the most important thing is to get that crop up and going. And depending on what kind of conditions we're dealing with, we may be able to just go out there and irrigate before and plant into good moisture. Most people are going out planting and watering it up, and I suggest don't stop until you get an acceptable stand. Pay attention to any crusts that you may have to work with that may require some of these smaller, little 1/4 to 1/2 inch irrigation passes till it's up to where it needs to be. In most cases, we can hold off for quite a while before we're going to need water, especially if we've got got some profile built up. Corn, we can probably wait till V8 or V9 in most cases, unless we're in a hot, dry spring. Then we would probably have to crank up a little bit earlier. Cotton, kind of the same thing. Getting it to that pre-flower stage before we really start cranking on it has been a successful strategy. As we have lower water, amounts, that's gonna, you're gonna have to move ahead of that just a little bit, just to be able to keep up with demands through the season. As we move into the growing season, really this is where we allow our, a lot of our technology, our eyeballs, our boots in the field, to be able to tell us what we need to be doing. And it's amazing, that plant's going to tell you exactly what it needs, both fertility wise and irrigation wise. This is where we utilize the moisture sensors, canopy sensors, imagery, and then, like I said, just boots on the ground to go out there and understand, okay, how are we doing? What do we need to make adjustments? We've got kind of a strategy from an ET replacement standpoint, but that's going to adjust based on weather and other factors as well. And so just rocking along, letting that plant tell us what we need to do and how we need to do it. Digging into some other things that happen. This is back to that 250 bushel field that we talked about earlier. We did a great job of getting those roots down, but come mid-July we had a really a big rain event, a couple of inches, and we had just applied a round of fertilizer on that crop. And these sensors that we use, we've got EC values on it, so we're able to kind of track where that nitrogen gets to. And I had to make the phone call and said, hey, I know you just put nitrogen out on that plant, but we just ran that thing all the way through the profile. And I said, we're going to have to put on another app on the next pass. And fortunately, he was trusted the data, trusted me. went out there and did that, and you know, that was part of the success of having that crop. But you know, having these kind of tools out there to help you manage things whenever, you know, whenever something like that pops up. This is not something that happens all the time, but you know, we all know that there could be that big rain event that's going to create some issues that we need to be able to adjust on the fly. As we get late in the season, you know, just understand that we're making yield all the way to the very end, to physiological maturity. But there are ways that we can start, you know, winding this crop down so that we use the available moisture in the soil, and then we're also setting ourselves up for success as we start getting it ready for harvest. And depending on whether you're using, you know, going for grain, going for silage, you know, there's a couple of different guidelines there. But you know, as we get towards that 50% starch line, you know, starting to draw that down a little bit. You know, a lot of this is weather dependent. You know, what does the forecast look like? Where are we at from a moisture standpoint? Where are those roots at? And you know, if we've got all those things in line, we can really cut back. If we've got a shallow root system, if we got a hot, you know, dry spell coming after that, then we probably need to make that extra pass. But it doesn't mean that we got to get too crazy, you know, and go out there and put a 2-inch pass. Maybe it's just a, you know, 3/4 inch to an inch just to keep that top foot freshened up. Cotton, this is very important. You know, we can really screw up quality more than yield at this point, and then create issues with harvesting. And so, you know, ideally we like to go with about a 70% replacement of ET as we get to that last effective bloom date, which is going to be August 20th for you guys. You know, I don't like going and chasing these September blooms. They're not gonna pay off. But you know, as we get towards that 1st of September, we drop that ET replacement rate into that 40 to 50%, and then depending on weather, we may have to make one more application there. You know, the 10th of September or something like that. But you know, following a strategy along these lines has really improved fiber quality, and really made harvest a lot easier, you know, dropping leaves and things of that nature. So definitely want to shut this crop down properly. We don't want to shortchange it, but we don't want to sit there and put on too much that we're dealing with issues late in the season. So as we dig into, you know, just some technology, you know, if you've got regulators on your pivots, understand that those things have a lifespan and they need to be serviced and replaced. You know, many times I go out and those things haven't been replaced in 10 years, and there's all kinds of craziness going on out there. So be sure you're taking care of that. You know, we look at our pressure gauges. If we're not operating in the design pressure ranges, we're going to have a lot of variability out there, and you know, unexplainable issues at the end of the growing season. So make sure that you're taking care of that. A lot of times we use imagery, especially, you know, throughout that early part of the growing season, to identify any of these you know, application issues. You got plug nozzles, you got pressure issues. A lot of times that technology can help pick that up before your eyes will ever see it. And there's lots of different providers out there that have the ability to look at that. And then just looking, you know, we've talked about split planting. Jordan, you know, talked about that, but you know, somewhere in that 30 to 45 day window, splitting between the different crops has been a very good strategy for us to be able to you know, to share that water. And then also looking at, you know, maybe reducing your population, shortening that maturity, or different planting dates. We utilize a lot of different things from a soil characterization piece. You know, we all know that every field's got some variability, and in a lot of cases we're sitting there trying to figure out, well, why does this part of the field do what it does and this other part always does better? And so we've been able to, you know, implement some technology, you know, to go out and measure that soil texture through EC mapping, and then we layered that on top of some topography layers to be able to understand where that water is going to go, and then we will ground truth that with soil testing to be able to understand, you know, what your fertility look like, what your organic matter, all these kind of things, to be able to start addressing some of this this variability. And whenever I first kind of got started in this back many years ago, a lot of people thought, well, you know, I've got these red spots that are low producing and I just need to put more inputs to it. But we found over the years that ground is probably not designed to handle higher populations, more fertility, more water. And so we've started reducing inputs for those and actually seeing an increase in yield versus getting over here in these, in these really good spots. We found that we were probably holding ourselves back in them because they got much better soil, much better water holding capacity, much more free available fertility. So we've been able to really push those, with plant populations, with actually less water in a lot of situations, and maybe some different fertility. And so being able to truly understand to start taking that variability out of that field and work towards an end goal. Just some quick looks here. This is a field that we worked with that was pretty interesting. This is just looking at the 3-foot depth and understanding, do we have any kind of differences, major differences as we're going through the profile, because we've identified some major stuff on the surface, but really wasn't too big of an issue here. But even in this field, if you look at these soil samples, you've got a little bit different texture with how they're holding together, different colors, and that crop definitely matches up to to yields and how it looked through the growing season. And so we made some adjustments with both the irrigation and planting population. This is just soil samples, but we're not going to dig into this very deep, but just understanding that each one of those different zones has different properties, that we're looking at managing, the organic matter, the pHs, the different fertility levels, part of that WEOC, that available carbon. All of these things are going to play into trying to reduce the amount of variability on that field. That lets us go in and start building some variable rate maps. So we did a variable rate irrigation, we did variable rate seeding on this one, and was able to get them back up yielding where they should have been for the amount of water that they had.
Hey Jeff.
Yep.
What's your range on like seeding rate, like on that map? You have like 7 or 8 zones. Like what?
So like that field in particular, that was probably about a 12 to 15,000 difference in cotton seeding rates. On corn, the next year we did about a 10,000. So it was going from about 25 to 35,000. But just another representation here of these different zones as they align with the colors on the map. This is probably what that crop's going to make. But as we get into better soils, we've got the ability to push that crop a little bit further, and so there are things that we can do to be able to manage that. Talking about variable rate irrigation quickly, we tend to lean towards the speed control, being able to slow it down, speed it up by sector, and according to those different soil types and textures and that topography, we'll put a different application rate. We may implement a different strategy for pre-water versus in season to be able to fill up that gas tank differently. But and then we'll layer some imagery over the top to make sure that we're doing this correctly. But in most cases, we're only varying this by maybe 1/4 to 1/3 of an inch between the high and the low. But a lot of times that is the difference between something running off and something not, and really giving you a good indicator of where those productivity zones are going to be and how we can manage that. Looking at windshield wiper pivots, these are always a challenge, and in most cases we end up overwatering on the ends and underwatering in the middle. And so we've been able to build up some scripts that kind of even that application out, and in a lot of cases reduce the amount of sticking that happens, especially late in the growing season. So definitely some things to consider as you start thinking about managing these pivots. Anybody got any drip irrigation in here? So quickly, we manage drip a lot different than we manage pivot, and a lot of this depends on that rooting depth. And so as we're early on in the growing season, we're still managing that top foot. We're down to that drip line level, and what a lot of cases we'll do is we'll put on a heavy amount in that zone and then be off of it for 3 or 4 days before we come back to it, instead of doing this 1/10 or 1/4 of an inch every day. And really what we're trying to do is build that where those roots will grow through the water instead of to it. Once we get past that dripper line, then that's when we generally implement a strategy of, an every day or an every other day. And then as we get to the end of the season, we kind of go back to that weaning it back off to a, every 2 or 3 day set, and as we get it ready for harvest. Different methods for determining soil moisture. We utilize all 4 of these. The good old hand feel method is a great way to to get some confidence in that what that soil moisture probe is telling you. It's also easy. I can carry that thing around with me. We can go to different spots in the field. There is a little bit of an art to it, but understanding, you can ribbon that soil out and at different depths and get a pretty good indication. Okay, how much water do I have available in front of the pivot, behind the pivot? Many people use soil penetrometers. These are going to basically tell you, is there water there or not. It's not going to really give you an idea of how much, but they also give you an idea where that compaction layer is, some things of that nature. We utilize capacitance probes. The nice part about them is they're stuck in a spot. They're reporting hourly, every day, all the way through the growing season from that same volume of soil, and being able to give you a good consistent data stream. And then finally we use imagery to look at the rest of the field, because that that soil moisture sensor is only in one spot. Maybe we see something happening over here on another part of the field, or we got a different soil type, and so being able to keep tabs on things from that standpoint. There's lots of different providers. We utilize a couple of these, but from sensors to the crop scheduling programs, and some of these come with with a full service option with a crop water manager behind them. Others are kind of dependent on the software to do the work for you. So just work with the systems and the people that you're comfortable with. Finishing up here, I did have a couple of minutes here, but I mentioned back earlier that we've been working with a few products that we've seen some promise with. This one here has we've seen some big improvements from an infiltration standpoint. So this product's utilizing some enzymes to be able to help that soil structure, be able to reduce some of that surface tension, and allow that water to get into the ground. And so this was a cotton field that we worked with that we were just we were starting to fall behind trying to keep up with irrigation back in 2020, and we ended up putting this product out mid-season, and immediately we saw an improvement right off the bat, with double the amount of water that got into the soil with 20% less irrigation. And so it gave me a lot of confidence that, hey, that maybe there's some things out here that can help with some of these high mag soils that we deal with, to get that water in, just to improve that soil structure. We've had pretty good luck with that, also helping out with some compaction layers, in that shallow, 4 to 8 inches as well. And then structured water. There's been some buzz around this, and we've been working with structured water since 2019. Kind of happened upon it accidentally, but been some very interesting research that we've done. But really, what the gist of this is that it's spinning that water into a vortex. There's quartz crystals in there that are exchanging hydrogen ions, and what it ends up doing is changing the structure of that water to a hexagonal shape. But it's also called H3O2, which is the 4th phase of water, which is actually what rainwater is, more or less. And so what we're seeing with this is reduced surface tension, helping that water get into the ground better. Many of my guys that are running these things have noticed that whenever they go change nozzles or unplug nozzles or anything like that, that their hands aren't cracking because that water is softer. We've seen reducing the pH. In turn, we've seen better water holding capacity, better infiltration rates, and where we're dealing with some salinity in this water, that extra hydrogen ion is kicking that salt off and making it free floating where we can leach it out. And so we've seen improvements in yield in both those salty water situations and in good water on multiple crops: corn, milo, cotton, and soybeans. And so something to definitely keep an eye on. There's different methods and ways of doing this. This particular one, attaches to a drop, and you only need 4 of them on a pivot, and everybody looks at me like I'm crazy. But if you've ever peed on an electric fence, you know that electricity doesn't necessarily just go one way, and that's kind of the same way here. Other ones have it at the center pivot point, and just a different mechanism. So if you want to learn more about this, I'll be around later on. We can talk offline. I don't know. Can you advance that? Bailey?
Oh, I'm sorry.
All right, so finishing up here, just call to action is that successful irrigation strategies, going to start on why we irrigate, not just how. We want to measure what's in the root zone and protect every inch because, water and mistakes are both expensive and are not getting any cheaper. Data alone doesn't manage irrigation, but people do, and that's you in the room, that's, people like myself, that's, the resources that we've got available. Let's all work together to be able to do this in conjunction with each other. Of course, I'm biased, but working with a trained professional in technology to turn that data into confidence will help you protect every inch of water. And lastly, water isn't cheap, and neither are mistakes. And so, anything that we can do to implement a lot of the things that you're learning in this course, I think will help you make it through the next several years as we navigate this.